Hello, my name is Jason Johnson, amateur radio operator, Kilo 3, Juliet, Sierra Juliet, and I am continuing the series in digital mobile radio. This is part 4 of the series that I have been doing for the Bowie Wireless Association. And previously, I've covered a number of topics. The first presentation focused on um, why DMR is important and why people are using it. In the second presentation, I defined what DMR is, going over key concepts, key definitions. In the third video, I talked about repeaters and hotspots and how they are used. And in this fourth video, I'm going to be going through important information of how to use DMR. This goes through the process of obtaining your DMR IDs, as well as um, kind of best practices that you'll want to observe when operating DMR radio. So now that you've learned about what DMR is, you may be wanting to go through the process of obtaining a DMR account to get active on the network. So to do that, you need to go to a website, radioid.net. And I'll go ahead and pull that website up and show you what that looks like. Just a minute. And there we are. So on radioid.net, there will be a login and sign up button at the top right. So you'll want to go ahead and read over the information on this website. If you've already obtained a DMR ID, you don't want to go through this process again. But if you've not obtained a DMR ID at this point, you want to go ahead and create your account. So you'll go ahead and read through this information and kind of agree to the terms of use and go through the process of creating your DMR ID. Once you have that, your DMR ID, you'll want to check out the one of the networks that's frequently used to make communications using DMR, and that is the Brandmeister network. So Brandmeister is a collection of equipment that allows talk groups to make communications with one another. And there's another network called TGIF that you may want to check out. I'm not going to be going through what is involved with TGIF and differences between TGIF and Brandmeister. Just know that those are networks that are both available. So to get access to the Brandmeister network, what you'll want to do is go to brandmeister.network. And when you log into that, when you go to that website, you're presented an option at the top right, to register. And you'll have to provide your call sign, your email address, and the DMR ID that you previously obtained. So you can't do this next step to get a account on Brandmeister until you have your DMR ID. As always, use good practices for using a password, something that's difficult for someone to guess that only you know. And then you want to kind of answer the question here for the anti-spam, and then you want to go through the process of registering. TGF.network is another one. It's similar where you have a registration button that you press, and in both cases they'll you'll have to register with the network, registering with your DMR ID. And once you have your DMR ID and you created your account on Brandmeister or TGIF, you'll want to obtain a hardware device that supports DMR. And there's a number of radios available, manufacturers. I have the Anytone 878 radio. Others include TYT, BTEC, and Motorola. My recommendation would be to talk to a member of your local amateur radio club. Each of these are available at a variety of different prices. You can get a DMR radio anywhere from $90 to $130. You can also get some that are more expensive, that have more features or maybe would be analog and digital. The other option you have is to use you could use a software-based client. So this would be DroidStar, for example, or software called BlueDV that's available for Windows machines. You will need a codec, a device that can handle the conversion of the voice communications into the codec used for DMR. That's ABME. And there are dongles available for this that you plug into your USB drive, USB device, but they're upwards of $100. So just due to limited volume, for example. So my recommendation would be to maybe really focus on, if you're wanting to get into DMR, but you're not wanting to spend a lot of money, is talk to an operator and see if they would have a radio to recommend, and you can kind of go with that to get started. Once you have your radio ID and your account on Brandmeister, you'll want to decide, how do you want to use DMR? So do you want to use DMR on local repeaters to communicate locally? Are there maybe some talk groups that you want to connect with on the national or international front? So Talk Group 91 is worldwide. It's available to a lot of people all around the world. A lot of people are using that, and it's active quite a bit during the day. Maryland statewide 3124 is frequently used by operators here in Maryland, and they do have a weekly net. I think it's on Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. And the nets can go from, I've seen 7 p.m. upwards of 9 o'clock. So it's options to talk to people on the talk groups. So what I did was, I decided kind of what talk groups I wanted to use, and I came up with a zone naming system in order to kind of group the channels I'm interested in zones, and then I had to pick channels that I wanted to use to communicate with. And one way that you can do this is just decide, well, maybe, for example, you want to communicate on DMR with local repeaters, but you're not quite sure what repeaters are available in your area to communicate on. So there's a website. Hold on up here real quick for us. There's a website called repeaterbook.com. When you go to the website, you can click on a link for North America, and it gives you a map. And I'm located in Maryland, so I'm going to click on the state of Maryland on the map. And this lists all the repeaters in Maryland, and I can filter them by kind of features I'm focused on or interested in. So for my case, I want to look at DMR repeaters. So click on the link for DMR. And then here's a list of all the repeaters in Maryland that support DMR. So I can do a find, and N3LHD is a local DMR repeater based out of Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And it's on the interstate network. Interstate is similar to Brandmeister in that there's a hardware you can use to connect to other users. And it actually has a connection in the Brandmeister network. So I see key information such as the frequency of that repeater. I see the offset. What you'll need to know is the color code. The color code is a required parameter that you have to set on a channel to get access to that repeater, similar to a PL tone or CSS we talked about in one of our previous brief presentations. So if I want to get full details on this repeater, I can click on the frequency pair here, frequency list, and it brings up the downlink and uplink frequency. It lists the color code and the DMR ID for that repeater. It lists the call sign, it's on the air currently. And it also lists a link to a web link, which will bring up more information about the network that this connects to. So this particular repeater is connected into the interstate system. And you can see, if you click on the Maryland repeaters link, it lists all the Maryland repeaters in the coverage map. But what I want to do is focus on this link, the talk group. So talk groups not all talk groups are available on a repeater. And this particular link will bring up some spreadsheets or PDFs where you can actually look to see what talk groups are available. You can also use this as a quick reference, which is what I did to get started. Is I looked at, recall for DMR, there's two time slots, time slot 1 and time slot 2. There's also the concept of a static talk group, which is available all the time, full time, and then a dynamic talk group that's available on an as needed basis when an operator does a push to talk. So this is a convention for the interstate system. The talk group 9 is local to that repeater. It'll only stay within that repeater. So you can have communications to talk group 9 to stay local to communicate with your friends or other operators. There's also talk group 3172, which is Northeast Regional Talk Group. That's available full time. Also, this lists on talk time slot 1 other groups that are available on a push to talk basis, as well as time slot 2 full time and time slot 2 push to talk. So, if you want to see the full list of talk groups available on the channels, you can kind of download one of these spreadsheets or download a PDF to view that information. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to the presentation, and yes, you go to repeater book to find the repeater channels that you're interested in, and you also would get the information about what frequency information you need to enter to connect to these channels. It's important that I'll review kind of key information about defining the channel. You'll have a channel name and number. This is kind of what you would pick. The DMR radio ID is your ID. This is what's used to identify you on that channel. The transmit receive frequency, the color code time slot, and then the talk group. So we've already seen how to obtain this information from repeater book and interstate system, for example. So you'll have to identify what channels you want to connect to. You want to kind of think about what zones. And then you need to use a naming convention that kind of makes sense, because you have to name these things in the memory of your radio, and that will display on the front panel. So when you program your radio, there's two ways to do this. The first would be through the front panel of the radio itself. So if I bring up the main camera real quick, I can show you. So on my radio, I have a menu. So there's a button to bring up the menu, and there's various options. So I can go down here, for example, on the zones, and it's kind of hard to see this. Yeah, it's not really showing up. These are the zones of my radio. I have this particular code plug, my hotspot, buoy wireless, and simplex zone. Also, I can go through here under the channels, and I have an option to do a new channel, delete a channel. So if I do a new channel, I can go through and put the channel name, the channel number, the frequency pair, the color code, the talk group. So, I could do the front panel. I could use that to program a radio, but it's pretty tedious. So in a pinch, maybe in the field, I could program maybe one channel. But if I'm talking about programming a lot of talk groups on a local repeater, that's not really the way to go through it. And the second way to do this is through a program to write what's called a code plug. So a code plug is just like a programming for your radio. So to start out to make a code plug, you want to download the master list of the DMR IDs. So when you talk to other users on the network, you will see their name, their call sign, their DMR ID, and location. So that there's several websites that maintain this. So you want to obtain that and load that into your software. You'll want to program your radio ID. That's just what you get from the radioid.net. So that allows you to put the radio ID that corresponds to this radio being yourself. You want to use your radio ID and not someone else's. So you'll set that in there. You want to create your zones, your talk groups, and your channels. And then finally, you'll want to save the code plug because you don't want all that hard work to be repeated, and then you want to write that to your radio. Now there's two ways of going about this. You could choose to do this yourself for the first time. A much easier way would be to talk to a fellow operator at your local club, and they would be more than happy to share a code plug. You can also go to the Interstate Network's website, and they have example code plugs for a variety of different radios that you can use to get started. So a naming convention. So you have to name each of the zones, talk groups, and channels. So for zones and talk groups, it's easy enough just to use a short name for those. For a channel, you'll want, because it contains information such as a talk group, for example, you want to come up with a naming convention that kind of makes sense, but also as you're using your radio, you're connecting to the right talk group that you think that you are. So the convention that I use is I will have for a repeater, I will use the first couple digits, well, the first designators as their call sign of that repeater. The next letters will be BM for the Brandmeister, if it's a connection to a Brandmeister network. Um, and then the final part of the name will be either an abbreviated name of the talk group or the actual talk group number that that channel is connecting to. Now, when talking about programming channels, there's two strategies that you'll want to think about, two ways that I found to do this. Method one would be one channel per talk group. So if I have the local repeater N3LHD, for example, say that I review the list of possible talk groups available, and I pick 5 of them. I pick 5 talk groups I really want to focus on. So in my programming software, I would have the transmit receive pair for N3LHD. I would have the color code. I think it's 6 if I recall correctly. And then that would be on like the row of like a spreadsheet. And then I would next have to put the talk group name or the talk group number that I wanted. So I'd list the first one and then have another, I'd have that for my first row. I would copy that row to the next row, and then I would have to change the talk group number. Then I'd copy and change, copy and change, copy and change. So I have 5, in that particular case, I have 5 rows, 5 memory positions in my radio taken up um, for the different talk groups. So why would I want to do this? Well, one pro of this is when I turn my radio dial to select my channel, I'm given a different name per channel position. So this is very explicit, and I know exactly what I'm connecting to when I hit the push to talk. The con of this approach is it's a lot of programming, and for every single talk group I want for that repeater, I have to have a duplicate row for that, and I have to change some things. Another method that's frequently used is having just one row that contains the channel information to connect the repeater. So this would be talk group, this would be the transmit receive pair. This would be the color code 6, for example, and you would assign the default talk group. So for me, maybe that's local 9. I want to have 9 time slot 1, and you also have to put the time slot. I'll have to let you know that. Now, what I can also do is to that particular channel is I can assign something called a receive group list. So what the receive group list is, it's a list of talk groups that if they were to come across time slot 1, for example, my radio would unmute and I could hear that communication. So why would I choose this method? Well, with this method, what I would have is each row of my spreadsheet view, right? For example, my radio would be the transmit receive pair for the repeater. It would be the color code number 6. It would be the time slot 1. It would be the default talk group, and then I would define the receive group, right? So I can just have one row on my spreadsheet and have a lot of different talk groups listed on that one row. So that's less programming. That's a pro. The con of this is if I hear maybe a communication coming across that, and I want to kind of follow up with that communication and join that talk group, I would either have to kind of push the talk while it's right after it's active to get it up, on the radio, or I have to kind of manually enter that talk group or make a menu selection to pick it. So it's a little bit, it's just kind of some trade-offs that you're doing. You're doing less programming, but you may have to do a couple more button presses to join the talk group. So which method is correct and which method is incorrect? Neither. It just gets down to preference and what would you would want to pick. And you could actually do both of them in your code plug if you'd like. So the next couple slides, I'm just going to show a couple screenshots of my particular programming software and some of the options of where you would set things up. So radio ID this is where I go in and define the radio ID for my radio. I would click on this and bring up another menu and I would program that. The contact talk group section is where I would enter the talk groups I'm interested in connecting with. And there's other settings you'll see here that I do not use, like for example, encryption. These are areas we would not use as amateur radio operators because we're not authorized by FCC regulation to send encrypted messages. So you definitely want to make sure you don't have encryption turned on the radio. My particular radio could be used for business use, and licensing on the business band allows encryption. But I can't set that up for me because I'm an amateur radio operator. Some other areas that you would frequently use would be areas in the zone. So if I would double click this zone area and bring up a list of zones that I have named. And also what that allows you to do is map the channels into the zones. So recall in a previous conversation, for my particular radio, you have to say that I have a zone called Bowie Wireless Association. And I may have some channels I've programmed in my radio for that particular zone, but I have to go into the setting and make sure that they're mapped properly, because otherwise they will not appear on my radio dial to use those channels. Some other things I'll call attention to is this optional settings menu item. What this has is a list of settings that I can define the function keys on my radio. There's a PF1, PF2 button on the front of the screen. These can be either defined for a short press or long press for a particular function. There's also buttons on the side of the radio. I have one of the buttons mapped to set the power, low, medium, or turbo. And the other button I have for the long press is to turn on the digital monitoring. So what digital monitoring allows you to do is, say, for example, you're tuned into a local repeater, and when a communication is going across a repeater, there's a little LED on the top that will illuminate green. So if I have it tuned to the repeater and it's green, but I'm not hearing a communication, maybe there's someone communicating on another talk group that I haven't programmed into my radio. So actually, I can turn on the digital monitoring and I can see what talk group is currently connected and what operator is communicating on that frequency of the repeater. You can also have settings and optional settings with color settings of your radio, boot options. I have mine set to boot up and display my call sign and name. And there's just a host of other options that you can configure with your radio. Another area that you may want to be interested in is APRS, which I won't go into, but you can define APRS information for your radio under that menu section. So this screen shows kind of what I was talking about before, is when you program a channel, you have a transmit-receive pair. You have the type of communication, in this case is digital, the power of that communication, the bandwidth, all the DMRs are 12.5. Here's my name of the channel, and this is the talk group name that channel is going to connect to as default. And if I want to edit one of these channels, I would just go onto a row of a spreadsheet and double click, and it brings up another menu option. So getting towards the end of the presentation, what I would like to do is kind of talk about my observations of DMR. So I've been operating for several months, and I've noticed that the audio quality is really good. I haven't had any issues understanding the operators on the network. I do like the fact that when someone is communicating, you get to see their name, call sign, and location. That's a nice feature of DMR that we don't have in analog. I frequently use the parrot when I'm kind of programming my radio. maybe making a change in our radio or trying to get it up to speed, making sure it's working properly. And Parrot is just an echo test. So for the Brandmeister network, talk group 9990 is for the Parrot. And on the interstate system, you would want to use 9998. And you need to refer to the time slot mapping to make sure that you're in the proper time slot for that particular talk group. I will say I found the initial programming to be quite tedious. I went through the channel method 1, where each channel was a separate talk group. And it took a while to kind of program my channels for the first time. This is an area where I would encourage you to look toward other operators at the local club who may be able to share their code plug with you. Just pay close account on this, though, that when you get a code plug from someone, you want to go into the memory of that particular code plug and make sure the DMR ID is your DMR ID and not the other person's. We don't want to unnecessarily make communications with DMR IDs that aren't ours. There is an extensive network of linked repeaters on the interstate system, and I showed the website earlier for that. I would encourage you to go look at that and review that in more detail. And then finally, I will say that the coverage area for the local repeater closest to me is very good. So this is N3LHD's coverage area that's posted on the Delmarva DMR website. The cross symbol is where it's located in Marlboro, and the dark red is the good signal strength coverage area. And then also you can see down to negative 91 dBm, for example, is the yellow, and negative 101 is the green. I have made calls inside of my house to connect the repeater with no issues. I've made, you can see on here, right, Bowie is in very good coverage area. Crofton is here. I made a call up north of Crofton in the repeater one day. I was picking up one of our kids at work, in the parking lot, was waiting, and made a call in 3LHD with no issues getting into the repeater. So it's very good coverage. Before I close out, I want to talk about some etiquette that you need to observe when using DMR. When you want to monitor the channel or make a communication, it's important that you identify your call sign by name. And also, what you'll probably want to do is give the talk group. So for example, I want to monitor Maryland statewide on the local repeater. I would say, this is Kilo 3 Juliet Sierra Juliet monitoring Maryland statewide, talk group 3124. Now, why give the talk group number? Well, for one, you may not be connecting to the talk group that you think you are. When I first got my radio configured, I was trying to reach one of the local talk groups, and local 9, for example. So I made a call out to local 9 and told the local 9, and someone informed me that I was actually connecting to local 2, which was a connection into, keying up local 2 will key up the N3LHD, but also other repeaters on the interstate DMR that are in the Washington, D.C. area. So the operator just said, you're fine, your comms check came back fine, just let you know you're on talk group 2. So it's a mistake I made in my code plug, and I thanked him for that and went back and kind of fixed my mistake. So that's one reason you want to identify the talk group you think that you're connecting with. So, because maybe what you think you're doing may not be lined up with what your radio has. The other reason why you want to identify the talk group is maybe there's someone who has a radio in promiscuous mode, and they're monitoring from across the hall or across the room. They can't see the radio in front of them, but they have the speaker turned on. So you could hear, audibly, hearing my call sign and hearing, what talk group I'm communicating on. And then they could pick up and say, hey, that's my friend. Let me go ahead and pick up the radio. So they know what talk group they need to connect to return the call. When you're making calls to, the second area is when making calls to the statewide talk groups, just observe that there's a limit, a 10-minute timer that you should observe. So if you have a communication that's going to be going over 10 minutes, you want to move that communication to another talk group. So for example, the TACs, TAC 310, 311, 312, those would be tactical kind of talk groups you want to switch to. And, just like in normal amateur radio, you just tell the operator, hey, I want a QSY to talk group 310, and then let them respond and confirm that. And you would just, announce that you're leaving and you're going QSY, that talk group. The final thing I'll mention as an etiquette is when you're making local calls on the repeater, you want to make them group calls and not private calls. And we recently learned this from the operator of N3LHD, that when you make a group call, it ties up additional resources on the network, mainly the C bridge. So we don't want to kind of overuse the resources when we don't necessarily need to. So just you want to kind of observe that. So this concludes the presentation of the overview of DMR for Blue Wireless Association. This is the 4th video in the series. I would encourage you, if you haven't seen the 3 previous ones, to watch those. I do have some exercises I will be demonstrating with some other operators at a local, at an upcoming Blue Wireless meeting. So I'd encourage you to attend that to check out this in more detail. If you do have questions about DMR that you would like to have answered, please feel to reach out to me. My email k3jsj@arrl.net. I'd be glad to kind of answer your question. If I don't know that answer to the question, I could put you in contact with someone who can help you. So thank you for tuning in, and this is Kilo 3 Juliet, Sierra Juliet, saying 73.